All right, another episode of Poetry Swap. I'm here with Sydney J. What's good, fam?
What's good, fam? How we doing?
I'm doing blessed. I'm doing blessed. It's rain. It's a rainy, like gross day, so it's the perfect day to like sit here and talk about poetry.
hmm You know what's funny about our backgrounds, but just so random? It's like inverse. Like you have black window coverings with a white wall and your green plant, and I have a black wall with the white window coverings and the white. That's the trip, isn't it?
Oh, I didn't even peep that. Okay, yeah, yeah. All right.
Okay,
Universe
cool.
is speaking and all.
hmm
um. So what? How do you I know you do all types of writing, but do you think of yourself as a poet first or just as a writer in general?
That's a great question, and it's actually something that I've been going back and forth with, like in this moment, just like, well, do I consider myself a poet or writer? And I think I share my poetry, but I actually have like tens of pieces that are not really poems that I've written. So I
Hmm.
think that I would um, prioritize calling myself a writer just because of where I do see myself as well in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't even know. I feel like there was a time where the designation between poet and writer was like very specific, right? Like, but
Mhm.
I just, now the way we tell stories, like I've been trying to call myself a storyteller and
Mm,
not be limited by, a poet. Cause, and I know that for myself, I am feeling myself kind of move away from poetry,
mhm,
um, uh, and a little bit. So because I always end up back at poetry, even when I say like I'm not going to write anymore, I always end up back to poetry. And I know you have a similar experience where you stopped kind of creating for a while and then came
mhm,
back. What brought you back?
exactly. Um, what brought me back, excuse me, was honestly, I recently went through like, and probably still going through just like, I don't want to say ego death,
Mm,
but maybe redefining my ego, kind of getting back to the core self. I was working a corporate job in 2022 and I was a manager in the mortgage industry, super busy. And I'm the kind of person where, or I used to be the person that I would attach myself to my achievements. Like, oh, I'm the manager of this, I
yeah.
college grad, this, and that. But then I wasn't like, to that point about putting the creativity on hold. I had nothing outside of those things that could be taken from me to define
Hmm.
myself by. So on in
Mm,
February of 2022, after I quit my job, um, I just went through all these random experiences, and of course, I'm like mostly at home during this time as well. And it put me in a state where it's like ancestors said, sit down and
mm,
listen to the messages we're giving you. And
mm.
just so many things started unfolding, so many things I didn't realize about myself, ugly things. Like people think of spirituality and getting in tune of that part of yourself as just the crystals and the candles. That's a piece of it.
For
But
sure.
a lot of people who are spiritual still haven't gotten to this day where they can look at themselves and say, like, I have this trait of pettiness or this or that. Where does
For
that
real.
come from? And so it was like kind of a buildup of looking at experiences where I was not just a victim, but also a volunteer. And
Mm,
whether it's things that happen with family, friends, people I've dated, like, just the dichotomy of everything just led me to feel like I need to get back to when I would put my experiences on paper and push my pen. And like, I love how you said being a storyteller, because now you've given me a name to think of for myself, because I'm like, I am telling stories like about my life and what I've learned, that I'm sure I'm not alone. Even if I feel alone, I'm probably not. And
right.
I just have this calling to share some of these experiences. And so I've always been the kind of person that would think of just clever stanzas or, what have you. And so I'm like, let me put that gift to use and get back to it. And then just words started coming to me. And
Mm,
I just made sure to keep it going.
yeah. There is something important about, being called as a creative, and especially in this time where, so much of the world is so wild, right? And there's so many things that exist that make us sad. And there, but we as creatives have a unique way to give voice to pain that others are feeling,
Yes.
right? And not everyone is blessed with that gift. So it's a gift, but it's also comes with a level of responsibility that
Hmm.
we need to that. And if you think about creativity as a spiritual practice, which I very much do, me not doing me, by me not doing the creative work that I have been blessed to do, um, is, denying the ancestors the glory of
Yes.
create putting that creativity and that calling on my heart, because somewhere I think storytellers are supposed to tell the story to someone that changes lives, right?
Mhm.
And we all have art that we're inspired by that does that. And
Right.
so but I took me but when it gets wrapped into a sense of wealth, sense of wealth and sense of worth and sense of, an imposter syndrome and all of those things that pull us away,
Mhm.
it can be sometimes, it can be difficult for a lot of folks to make their way back
Yeah.
to that.
That's so true. I like even sometimes now because I feel like there's different things, different projects that I'm like, it keeps coming up for a reason, and it's not anything that I've ever actually done or talked about before, but
Mhm.
these different things are coming up for a reason for me to act on. And, it's not just how can I put this? Like, it's not just about for us anyway, for people like us who go through these very nuanced things in life. And sometimes, what we write and still tell stories about isn't always about pain. A lot of times it is, but sometimes it's
Mhm.
just a simple experience. But like, there's a reason we go through these things. And I had to think about it like, it's not selfish for wanting to, you know, spread a message and to bring awareness to my gift because that's the whole point of a gift is to give it to other people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, imposter syndrome definitely hits heavy because a part of me is like, I'm 33 now and, I haven't really been in the creative world as an adult. And I'm like, I'm popping up out of nowhere. Like, is this really me? Am I trying to go back to childhood things that are, null and void now and just, stick to going back in the cubicle? But I'm like, no, no, that's the whole point is for me to feel those things, but to still move through those things. So,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah. I think the freedom, so much of my creative journey has been tethered to my spiritual journey, right? And so
Mhm.
I don't see those experiences as separate.
Mm.
Uh, and I know not everyone comes at their creativity from that space. So, but I think that there is something to be said for what happens when those two, um, when that alignment happens, and I also think that this is where some of that, ego death that you were talking about is important because it
Mhm.
allows, um, you know I think I before would have described my ego as like a good thing, right? And I recognize now, as I'm leaning and living more in my spiritual space, and in a conscious space, how much how much my ego, which is, operating from a space of protecting me, but
Mhm.
also, you know can keep me tethered to old thinking.
Right.
And so that process is super, that process is important, because the in order to live more from a conscious space, some of that, tethering to our earthly kind of conscious space has to happen, right? So there
Right.
and
Right.
and for me, that is always um that uh that has, and I recognize the more that I let go of my ego, the more free my writing becomes,
Mhm.
because I'm not holding on to the what will people think of me? Why is this, like all of these things that are really just about my mind playing tricks on me and not
Mhm.
my alignment.
That's the key. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to read your piece?
Yeah.
Cool. I have lots of yeah, I have lots to say.
Awesome. All right. So let me open it up here. All right. So this piece that we're discussing, it's withered. You don't get kudos for watering the seeds that you buried. They never asked to be planted in the first place. And although it was difficult to find the sun through the thick, dark clouds, the seeds still managed to sprout and emerge through the soil, forming roots, a stem, leaves, petals. Thank you for not letting the plant die, but excuse me while I clip the withered leaves, gather the fallen petals, and nurse the plant back to health.
Mm. Where Thank you for sharing that. Where does that what inspires this poem?
So, my father actually inspires this poem.
Mm,
This is a poem about um, the difficulty in really understanding that a completely emotionally unavailable and neglectful parent in the household um, can still cause harm,
mm,
because it's almost like you're looking at them walk right past you, going
mm,
through pain. Sometimes that another parent in the household causes,
yes.
sometimes, from outside sources or what have you. And actually, I'm looking at the date, June 12th, 2023. I was going to send my dad that on Father's Day. Um, but I was like, you know what? I can I can relay this message a different way, and I
Mhm,
have to him directly, more in a more direct way. But this is just a piece where it's like, if you like, quite literally, if a gardener is like, look at me, I planted this plant, and the plant is all like bruised and unhealthy, it's like, okay, great, but like, you planted something and you almost had no means to make sure, is the soil healthy? Is it getting the
mm,
best sunlight? Or you're just watering it and that's the bare minimum.
mhm,
And that's I kind of used that bare minimum of like, I put a roof over your head and compared it to the gardener. Well, I watered the plant, the seed, and
mm,
that's how that poem came to life.
mm. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about seeds because we're in this season, and I used to say that I did not have a green thumb. I had a black thumb,
Mhm,
because I would kill everything, right? So,
mhm,
and just recently, like recently, like a month ago, I took a seed that I found, a few seeds that I found, and germinated them and planted them, not thinking that it would actually work. And 3 weeks later, I've
Mhm.
got plants growing, and which is like mind blowing. Like it's such a simple thing, but um, and so I think so I was thinking about that, and thinking about and using that as a way to think about the seeds that are inside each of us,
Mhm.
and there's a divine seed inside each of us that we ask, or we hope that on this, while we're on the earth, that it will be watered. And for most, for the beginnings of our lives, they need to be watered by others. We
Mhm.
need to feel that watering, and that prepares us to bloom into the world.
Right.
But what happens if for lots of reasons, if you don't get the that it's not enough just to get water, right?
Right.
You need to get sun, you need to get shade depending on the plant, you need to get nutrients, you need to get tilled, the
Mhm.
brushes, the deadfall needs to be removed. Um, all of that needs to happen, and if you don't receive that from the people who are supposed to, who put that seed in the ground, then spend a lot of our lives trying to figure out um, how we clear the dust. How do we
Right.
gather those, how do we gather those fallen petals? How do we remove them so that that plant can grow?
Mhm.
And this has literally what I've been thinking about for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Because when
Yeah.
I had, well, maybe before that, but certainly with intention for the
Mhm.
last 5, 6 years, because I had done such a great job at blocking um, out the fact that my seeds were not properly taken care of in my formative years. I put a mask up, I put a wall up, and it wasn't until just before the pandemic that I had kind of the revelation that you were talking about earlier, where
Mhm.
where you got a chance to look at your life and be like, is this what I was supposed? Is this supposed to be it?
Right.
You
Mhm.
know, um, and that is a that's a scary place to be, because at least for me, I recognized that almost every decision I had made was made from a place of trauma, and therefore um might be an invalid decision, or a decision that wasn't in the best interest of me, because it was in the best interest of my wounded me.
Mhm.
uh, and and then when the pandemic came, there was nothing else to do but to think about those choices, because you
Mhm.
couldn't work, you couldn't, no place to go.
Mhm.
um it's a very intense process to have the courage, let alone to do it, but to have the courage to clear that brush out.
Mhm.
um what does that look like for you, and how have you expressed that as a storyteller?
So, to your point about making a lot of decisions from a wounded space, I didn't realize until the past couple years, when I put myself it's interesting because my, ego death, like the start of it came, of course, a couple years after, we were all held in confinement. So while everyone's out in the world, I'm mostly at home, in
Mm,
hermit mode. So that was the time when I realized a lot of these decisions I've been making were either for approval or coming from a place of wounding, which approval, because I'm like, Dad, look at me like I'm accomplishing something. That wounded masculine side of myself that, we all have a or a masculine side of ourselves, but that was the
Mhm.
wounded masculine side for me, is doing things that were out of approval instead of what felt true to me.
Yeah.
So for me, gathering the leaves and nursing a plant to health, which I don't quite know, what that looks like. I know for every plant it's different. Sometimes I see videos of like, oh, you clip this leaf or, you do whatever. But like for me personally, it's been looking like evaluating the relationships in my life
Mhm.
and evaluating a lot of the codependent behaviors that I partook in and that were mirrored and projected onto me. And again, this is for family, friends, people I've dated,
Yeah.
um, even work relationships, and how I navigate the corporate world if I ever go back to that, which I
Mhm.
tried for a second and didn't work. But it looks like me not going places are that don't feel safe for me, instead of going to these spaces like, I'm gonna prove myself to them. I can feel that I'm not wanted, but I'm gonna
Mm.
prove myself. Again, fighting for approval.
Yep.
Um, it looks like simply me doing all the different things creatively, hobby-wise, and just really taking care of myself. And that's the outside perspective. From the inside, it looked like even me, eating healthier, taking better care of myself. And like this is almost quite literally how you would, treat a plant. You want to make sure that you give it. I know plants have like plant food. I see it when I buy bouquets of roses and it has a little food. Like,
For
you want
sure.
to give it healthy food. So it looked like me eating better. Because if my diet is crap, I'm not going to be in the clear state of mind. I'm not going to get the messages and have the energy to do the things I even want to do. It means
Mhm.
taking care of my physical vessel, because we hold all of this trauma we hold in our bodies. We have to move it
For
outward.
sure.
And,
Yep.
I spent years sedentary working in an office. So, that caught up with me. I looked very fit, but I wasn't. So it looks like really taking care of myself in the
Mm.
ways where I literally ask myself, what interests you? Okay, go do it.
Mm.
Whatever
Mm.
it is, as long as I'm not hurting myself or anybody else, just go do it. That's honestly
Yep.
what it looks like.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There is there's a line in the piece that I want to also that I think is super powerful, and it allows for this what you're talking about to happen.
Mhm.
Sometimes when we're in that healing space, right? We like I know for me, like I cursed my parents for a long time, right? Because I didn't even really know why I was cursing them, but I didn't acknowledge. Well, I did know why, but I didn't acknowledge. It took me a long time to acknowledge and offer gratitude even to them. Right. And that's
Mhm.
why I love that line. Thank you for not letting the plant die. Because what I took from that is, you know, how it. Well, you're much younger than I am, but we used to say like, you know, um, respect your elders, even if they didn't deserve respect. You still had to say
Oh,
respect. You
yeah.
still had to respect your elders. And
Mhm.
I think that it was an art. An expectation without any responsibility on the elder to show respect back,
Right.
which and so I think that there's something so lovely about that line, because it's a way of acknowledging, well, thank you for putting me here,
Yeah.
for getting me here through this far. Now let me go do my work
Mhm.
to undo the things that you did. I thought that was a really great line.
Thank you. I really appreciate that because, like I mean, I was raised a good chunk of my earlier childhood by my great grandmother from Alabama, and we know
Mm,
a Southern grandma doesn't play.
right.
But she, up until her passing, I was the third generation that she raised.
Mm,
Because she moved from Alabama to San Francisco by herself, and she raised her kids, and then my mom, which is her grandchild, and then me and my younger siblings until she passed. And so certain manners and morals and codes and things like that, those are embedded in me. And
Right.
there, I'm always going to have a level of respect for really for anybody, but absolutely for my elders. It's just there's something so confusing about realizing certain things so late because you know how you mentioned like you cursed your parents for a long time. That's how I was to my biological mom
Mm,
for other things that she's, done. But at the same time, it was a little different because like I was raised or I was in a household for a latter part of my life with my dad. Very complicated family story, but, I wasn't raised by her, a good chunk of my life, but there are certain things that she did that were more blatant, where it's like, "Okay, that's wrong." But
mm,
then with my dad, it kind of all caught up to me, like, at once, and I was just like, "Whoa, wait a minute. These things were actually not okay." And, of course, I'm here, I'm healthy, I was always fed, clothed, and, whatever, but, like, there's so many things, big and small, where it's like, these are just extremely problematic. So, there is a level of like it's and I still battle with this. I'm not gonna lie. Like me writing this poem doesn't mean that I don't still have these conflictions
right.
because I do. But at
Hmm.
the same time, it's like there's also that saying where, it's like, oh, they tried their best. And I battle with that saying, about like, oh, they tried their best. Cause like even though I know that he did, it's like, damn, it just still sucks. So I still thank him for the parent that he was, but I still hold him accountable too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, I, both my parents died in the same year. They weren't
Mm,
together. And so they died for completely different reasons, but they both died the same year. And I really didn't know really how to feel either in either case, right? It was um because when there's so much underbrush, so much tension, so much that you're trying to detangle, it's it's still and so there's all of that energy that I was still trying to work through. I
mhm,
hadn't even probably even started working through it when they died, but also trying to memorialize the fact that my parents were dead. Like I just really, and I think that that is, you know, probably true for a lot of people who have experienced, you know, any type of trauma from authority figures or where you're trying to reconcile, especially like in the church where you're reconciling your faith with your abuse and,
mhm,
and I, um, and I think I was trying to treat them equally because I just had such energy towards both of them, and it took me a while to recognize that while the way that what I felt from them felt the same, how I needed to deal with them was different,
yeah,
and how I needed to reconcile. Um, and part of that was that acknowledgement was saying, okay, for whatever reason they did the best that they can do, and you know, I'm
yeah,
still here though, so
right,
now let's figure it out from there.
mhm,
Very cool.
yeah, thank you.
All right. Shall I read my poem? It's a little
Yes,
longer
please.
than it's longer than
You know,
yours.
it's alright. I like a
All
long poem personally.
right. Yeah, I tend to write story. Like I tend to write longer. All right. So this is called Watermelon Noun Laters. I fell in love with a boy once, long before I loved you. He was small and frail and laughed from his belly. Every day at school, he smelled of watermelon now and laters. Everyone knew he was the gay one, back when being gay was still a curse and bisexuality was unspoken. I was filled with rage and pain, abandoned by God in a parking lot, abused by two men who took communion from my blood and flesh, leaving me to die as if I was unworthy of life. I wanted to give that pain away to the gay boy. Long before I knew how my body worked, my mind wandering to unclean thoughts filled with shame, somehow those men had to know. Why else would they have picked me, the boy who lusted after Boy George? I was a sinner, needing to wash my sins away in the blood of another, the way those men sacrificed me to wash theirs. Maybe then I wouldn't hate myself the way God hated me. Despite my best intention, the gay boy became my friend. We took long walks to the library, flipping through Judy Blume and Encyclopedia Brown books, shortcutting through abandoned buildings still smoldering for the insurance money. We laughed about cartoons and wrestling, pretending to be Superfly Snooker jumping off the top rope, splashing each other into the dirt, embraced by a dust cloud of asbestos and mold. This made me angry. He wasn't supposed to be nice. He was just supposed to be gay. That should make him worthless. Worthless like me. I planned to beat him in one of those buildings, crack his skull open, watch his gay brain bleed onto the rubble, listen to him whimper as the voices fueled me to hit him again. I transformed into a vampire, desperate for blood to make me whole, to reclaim my power back. It started to rain as we walked the day I decided to kill him. It began, uh, we took cover in a burned out building, the stench of death and dampness still lurking. This was the perfect place to leak his blood into the pit of hell. No one would find him here the way I wished no one found me. He walked in front of me. He always did. I cursed myself for enjoying his sway, the way he laughed and swirled as he looked back at me, cutting myself. Oh, sorry. Yeah, cutting myself for those impure thoughts, those gay thoughts. I became fixated on the spot of the back of his head, the soft spot that when a baby is born, it would be my target. I picked up a busted brick. It was heavy in my hand, sweat dripping into my palm. This rock would be my moment, my resurrection. I yanked him to the darkest part of the dusty rubble, the accelerant still dominating the air. My empty hand reached around his neck, my resurrection at hand, and I kissed him. The rock slipping into the ash, his half eaten now and later sliding into my mouth, our confused tongues lost in rhythm. It is still the best kiss of my life. Truth is, I did not want to kill him. I wanted to love him long before I knew how to love. I wanted to touch him long before I understood the power of touch. I wanted him to tell me I was okay and good and not condemned to a life in the shadows because my body responds to the wrong thing. Perhaps he could help me understand me. We spent months rummaging through old buildings and rooftops, finding poems in empty library, never saying a word while in school. Our hands explored each other, his mouth explored my body. We laughed in whispers, and I tried to hide my shame from him, although he just wanted me to be the boy who hid in the shadows of the abandoned buildings.
Mm.
Then the winter came, our abandoned love nest covered in the worst snowstorm in a decade. I fell in love with the girl who introduced me to Prince, and I didn't need him anymore. But I never stopped loving him, hoping he was safe and seen, wondering if he remembered me, my first love. Poem.
So, first of all, like I told you, I really appreciate you even feeling called, and I'm gonna address that too, like how you felt your intuition told you to send this to me. And I read this a few times and I picked up on a couple different things each time. And I just have to say it's with all the other little things, our background similarities and what have you. Um, I write in a very similar manner most of the time, where
Hmm.
it's a story, and it like I can read this and I can watch a little movie in my mind, and I can feel, of course, from my own perspective, I can feel these feelings of. So there's a few things, like there's the paragraph here. Let me scroll back up. The one where it's like it was a buildup of feelings of rage and wanting to reclaim your power through his body. And then you kiss him. And then that's where you see that fusion of wanting approval from someone who, hold on, I wrote some notes here, but it's like a push and pull between wanting to find a reason to hate someone because they're living in their authenticity, but also wanting their approval because of their authenticity.
Hmm.
Authenticity.
Mm.
And also there's it just, well, firstly, I was curious, with this story, about how old were you when this occurred?
13.
That sounds, yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. And it just made me think about too, like, obviously I'm not a man, but I do know, with being a gay black man, especially, you know, in, you mentioned that you're older than me, but like even in this day, it's
For
it's
sure.
still it's still not easy. Just with my own eyes looking, it's still not easy. But especially because it was easier to conceal hate because we didn't have social media and just all eyes everywhere at the same time. It was more acceptable to be hateful of heterosexuality, bisexuality, especially amongst black men. I can only imagine being a 13-year-old boy and feeling alone, not just because you're at an abandoned building, but internally.
Yeah.
And
I
I
think
wanted
there's
to,
a lot to that.
I'm sorry.
No, there's a lot to that point. I was just agreeing with you.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
my sound cut out for just a quick second. But yeah, I did want to, like, kind of ask about 13-year-old you.
Yeah.
It's different to write about it, but like when you think back to when you were in that moment, when you're 13, um, and you spent the months with him, just you and him, and kind of the outside world was silent. Like, after this moment when you realized, I want to love him, like, what was the rest of your guys' encounters like internally and spiritually for you, as this probably opened your eyes to your sexuality?
Um, you know, I it was it's interesting because it kind of I keep thinking I think I've thought about that experience a lot, and I and thought about it more after the movie Moonlight came out, because I know that for me, and I never saw this person again.
Mm,
Like we graduated. It was the end of our eighth grade year, and then after that we went, to high school, and I never saw the person again. So um I but you but it is, and so I think what I was but I all of my memories of that time are wonderful and
yeah.
needed. And I wonder, I was really in a um to have that happen the same year that I was sexually assaulted was
Mm,
very hard for me to was very difficult for me to reconcile. And most of my therapy initially was about trying to separate the fact, separate my bisexuality from the fact that I had been sexually assaulted, and ask myself, like, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking, if I wasn't sexually assaulted, would I sometimes sleep with men?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Uh, and it took me decades to answer that question. Um, and so, um, 13-year-old me has been waiting for me to figure this out, because I don't think I ever, like, I would say a large part of what I've discovered from my healing journey is that I never grew past 13.
Mhm.
I kind of was stuck in, you know, if you think about what a 13-year-old, mindset is, right? Like those early teenage years, they're,
Yep.
confusion and exploration and body transformation and who am I in this world, and
Mhm.
separate from my parents, and my family, like, beginning to create self-identity.
Right.
My self-identity, that opportunity to really create my own self-identity, was taken away from me,
Yeah.
and wrapped up in all of this other stuff. And so the easiest thing that I could do was to not deal with it.
Mhm.
And I put it in a box and I locked it up super tight. And it wasn't until the Me Too movement started that I started thinking about, first I was thinking about, well, how do I be the best man that I could be to women? And then I started having nightmares about my sexual assault, which I hadn't thought about in years. So, my 13-year-old me is happy that I'm doing this work. And the easier, and I'm trying to grow him up,
Yeah.
uh, because, uh, be- and I guess that's the work for all of us, right? Is to figure out where that trauma trigger is, where that point is, and then go get that version of us, and
Mhm.
hold that version's hand, and bring him or her, uh or bring them, you know move them a little bit further on the timeline.
Yeah. No, I completely agree and understand that part. And also, I want to say too, as a fellow survivor of assault, and sexual abuse, I deeply empathize with you, and I understand that physically here, you're obviously not a 13-year-old, but the 13-year-old you didn't deserve that.
Hmm.
And I hope one way or another that the people who did that to you, were served justice, one
Yep.
way or another. So
Yeah. I
there's
mean, I think in a lot of ways, I was very lucky in that, um, in that I reaped the benefit of justice. Um, the the they went to jail.
yeah.
I had to testify against them, and so all of the, like, that kind of, uh, justice that so many women, do not get, I got.
Mm,
Um, and I found out, I had to be notified when they were getting out of prison, and whether or not I wanted to write, you know, um, uh, testify in their parole hearings and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So hearings. So in that sense, like, I had satisfaction in that way,
Mhm.
um, in the way that so many people don't. And but where I struggled was that was what it also did was disconnect me from my faith for a long time,
Mhm.
because my and from my family. My grandmother said to me, um, when I was assaulted, that God was punishing me, and so that was more than any trauma that I've experienced, the most traumatic experience that I have had was my grandmother telling me that God no longer loved me. Because what I heard was God doesn't love you because you're bisexual, and not what she was saying was God punished me because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and I got raped. Either way, like,
Yeah.
uh, and reconciling that has been the hardest thing that or the most important thing that my 13-year-old needed to hear.
Yeah, and, I picked up on the several religious references, in this poem, and it made me think of exactly what you just mentioned because it's like, you know, how do I say it? Like, it's not uncommon to grow up in a Black family, where everything is pinned on religion, Christianity, the church of some sort,
Hmm.
and, it's unfortunate to hear that as a 13-year-old because that is the pure definition of, a grandma saying the like, what they knew, the best that they could or what have you, like, that is the
For sure.
epitome of that,
Yep.
and, you know, on the topic of my father, he is a devout Christian, and, I don't wanna derail too much, but let's just say that, when it comes to there's an unhealthiness in Christianity, and religion in that way a lot of times. I won't say it every time, but just a lot
Hmm.
of times, but especially in our families, because Christianity has often been used in a way to shame, things that people don't deserve, and whether you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they sense because a lot of times too people see things on us that we don't see,
Right.
and so whether that was the case where it was like, how did they know? And they attacked you accordingly. Regardless, it's like, and I know you know this now, but you didn't deserve that. But like, that's what I'm saying. There's the religious references in there made me think like, this is his way of regaining power. And all too often, unfortunately, bad things happen or people do bad things under the guise of Christianity, the church, or this is how it should be done because they take it so literally, but it becomes dangerous because it's also in a way where feeding to a um, it's feeding to the colonized version of what the Bible is saying. So
Hmm.
let's just that's just the best way I could explain. But yeah, I picked up on that, and that actually answered one of the questions I was going to ask too. Like, what if the uh, guilt of religion was a factor in this poem? And it sounds like, in one way or another, it was because of what your grandma told you.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure, for
yeah.
sure. And I didn't. Yeah, it is. I think that all religions, and in my other non poetic life, I have this like desire to dismantle all religion,
Mhm,
organized religion, because I think so
mhm,
much of, and this is true about Christianity, but also true about all of the other major world religions,
yeah,
uh, is that there is a focus, uh, there's a fearful energy that they all espouse, which is a way of creating a control mechanism,
mhm,
and that leaves. if we think about all of the destruction that we experience, a lot, almost all of it, is because of one person's interpretation of religious doctrine over another person's interpretation. Um,
Mhm.
and we've made that worse in North America by adding into that um, politics. So now our politics are being driven from a um, religious perspective,
Yeah.
and people who see all of that energy and are like, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that religion. I don't want to use my God, the name of my God, in the destruction of some other people. But they're like, but this is my God. These are my people. Where am I going to go? So now
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide my own personal values
Mhm.
against my faith. And that's just a sad state of the world, because more harm has been done in the name of religion than any other force in the world. And until we disconnect and motivate and inspire people to disconnect their faith from their religion, from their spiritual practice, and remove the gatekeepers of church and pastor and priest and imam, so that you can have a direct connection with the divine source,
Mhm.
is the only way that we get past that and get to see people as humans. Because right now we just see them as you know, so many of us see the person as the God that they serve, or as the color that they are, or as the gender that they are, and not see the humanity. And if we thought of God as the non-denominational and universalist, um, there is we wouldn't see destruction. We would not think
Yeah.
that the God that is about universal love could also be about destruction.
Exactly.
So that means that that is man.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that is, I want to spend a lot more time, or I am spending more time, less time writing and more time trying to figure out how we use writers and use creatives to bring more, energy into the, into our world, that allows people to see faith, see the practice of faith, the fellowship of faith, see it in a different way.
Yeah. I love that. And I don't really have much to add to that because you really hit it right on the head with a lot of things I've been thinking. And, I'll be honest, like only recently did I start really reading the Bible.
Mm,
And I actually have my great grandmother's Bible, the one that raised me, that passed
yeah,
on. It was something I took, and I can tell it's a Bible that's been around. It came from Tennessee with her to San Francisco. Now it's with me.
right.
And so reading and understanding is the baseline, because it's almost like if you guys actually read the doctrines of every religion, a lot of
Hmm.
this hate that you're talking about that goes on, that ain't what they talking about.
No,
They never said that, like,
never,
you
never,
know,
never.
and again, like I don't have much to add, but it's true. Like, unfortunately, it's like, yeah, how people you like how people treat the next is like how I'm treating you, even though, I'm hurting you or I'm saying this or whatever, it's right because it's in here in this Bible. It's in this doctrine. It's in, whatever the religion is.
Hmm.
And this is a whole nother topic for another day, but even new age spirituality is getting to that point too a bit, because that's even more fluid. And uh, there's no Quran, there's no Bible, there's no, I don't know the name of the other books, but there's no set book
Yeah,
on how to navigate spirituality in general. So like just really it literally is extracting the soul from the shell that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
extracting the soul and the spirit from the shell, and that's how
Yeah.
you treat it. So,
I
my
love
phone.
that.
I have to keep my notes because sometimes I be forgetting.
Hmm. I think, yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny that you said there is no book. Because that's my next project is
Nice.
writing, is, writing, it's called The Gospel of Vibes. And
Mm,
it is a reimagination of what spirituality could and should look like today,
mm,
and it is and the fundamental of it is, what if you looked at all of the world's religions and laid them on top of each other and removed everything about fear and removed everything about subservience to a higher
mhm,
authority, right? And
mm,
recognized that we all are gods and goddesses on this planet. And so
mhm.
if you saw everyone as a god, everyone is a goddess, right? You saw their if you decided to chose to see the seed that is in all of us, how would life be different on this planet?
Yes,
That's my
I love
and
it.
it may be completely the great I have been struggling with this imposter syndrome of why is it me, why am I writing this, like who am I, like I'm not a religious scholar and blah 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 blah,
Yeah.
but yet that's that ego, right, that's stopping me
Mhm.
from doing the thing that literally I heard the whisper from the angels
Yeah.
that said you
Right.
do this.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, whole time, your spirit team behind you like, "Boy, if you don't get to that laptop, it's"
Facts.
You probably felt a little one of
Facts.
your locks, like, "Wait a minute, who's behind"
Oh, I just feel like, oh, wait, where am I going? Yeah, all the
But no,
time.
that's beautiful, and, I can't wait till it's out, because, yeah, I really think that that is the basic I don't I feel like the things that we just brought up right now, or that question you just had, like, if you stack every religion on top and remove the fear, what do you have? It's such a simple, straightforward, and direct question, but somehow people will still find a way to dance around it. So I'm excited to whenever it comes out, no rush, but whenever it's released, to grab that book. And also, I just randomly thought of something. Yeah, I know we have gods and goddesses, but for those that are they them, what if you put in goddess, like GODDEX?
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. It's interesting because the first chapter of this book is the first chapter of this book of my book is God has a PR problem,
Mm,
and and in it I basically am writing that God should change its name. We should change the name of God
mm,
because so much of harm and destruction has been made in the name of God. And God is, there's another chapter. The epilogue of the book begins with God being sitting in heaven, chilling. And he's pissed because everyone is using his name in vain and using his name in, to cause, destruction, pain, and blah 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 blah. So he called, because I think there's something interesting there. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. And I like, so how would I spell it? God.
I I don't know, it just popped up, GODDEXE or EXX? I don't know, it just popped in my mind, like, as you're talking about it. But that's interesting that that's, like, literally the first chapter, so there's something there for sure. That's
there
awesome.
there is something there. And I think, I have a friend of mine that every time I say God, um uh they always say, like, if I'm like, God damn, they'll say goddess, right? We have gendered God.
Mhm.
And there is nothing about the creation of the world that says that God is a man,
Right.
right? Like we know Jesus, like so I think there's also something about challenging that idea as well.
Mhm.
That um that um and yeah, I'm gonna have some like it'll be it is the beginning of the I have been struggling with how to write this with serious like with
Yeah.
seriously, um and I'm gonna be much more uh subversive and interesting because I just think we need we just need something interesting and subversive about God. I don't know. Uh
That we do. Yeah.
yeah. Where can we find you on socials? What's your primary social media
Yeah.
platform?
My primary social media platform is Instagram,
Okay.
and, it's Sydney J, Sydney, the letter J, dot XO. Gotta throw a little hugging kiss in there.
Mm-hmm.
I do have Threads as well, and, not smaller, but it's the same exact thing, and, I am working on other platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm working on rebuilding my YouTube. So that's something that I will share um, once I get my channel created. I do have a Substack. It's just that I haven't actually openly talked about it yet. So this is the first time I'm
Yeah.
talking about it. But I I'm still trying to figure out how I want to go about that. Honestly, the user interface is still a little bit tricky for me to navigate, so I haven't been putting a lot of effort into it,
Yeah.
or a lot of time until recently, but that is something that I'll also be on as well, where I have more of my think pieces on there. Um, I'm just trying to think if I'm missing anything. No, those are that's it. Instagram and Threads, which
Oh,
are one and the same. YouTube
yep.
coming soon, Substack release soon.
Amazing. Very
Yeah.
cool. Sydney J, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a
And
pleasure, Ralph. Thank you for having
we're
me.
swapping poetry and talking about all the stuff we talked about. I really yeah, I needed to have this is a conversation that I needed to have because
Yeah,
I don't have it very much. So I thank you.
thank you.
And yeah, see you. Join us for the next poetry swap. Won't be
Yes.
hopefully it's as good as this one.
Thank you.
All right.